I've been designing games for over 15 years now, and 2025 was the fourth year of me designing games full-time, earning all my income only from game design. Since 2020, I've shared my income every year from game design with the purpose of trying to increase transparency in the games industry so that other people can get an idea of what you can earn being a game designer. And in this video, I'm going to go over what I earned from game design in 2025, breaking down what I've earned from various games and from other sources as a game designer. Hi, I'm Matthew Dunstan. I'm a full-time game designer based in Australia, and to date I've had over 60 games published in various languages all around the world. On this channel I like to talk about all things game design, from my experiences in the industry to tips and tricks that can help you on your own game design journey. In this video I'm going to go over what I earned from games in 2025 and break that down into different sources. I want to start though, before I get into the figures, with a couple of caveats, and I think these facts are really important to know in concert with this final number of what I earned from game design, because everyone's context is different. Everyone has a different situation, has a different history in designing games, and that's really important. All those things add up to influence what you end up earning. The first is that I've been doing this for over 15 years, and my first game that was professionally published by another publisher was in 2013 with Relic Runners from Days of Wonder. So 2025 is 12 years since my first game was released, which is quite a long time. And as I've talked about in other videos about the finances of game design, there's often a very long lag between making games and actually earning money from them. And as such, it takes a really long time for your earnings to ramp up. So while the amount of money I'm earning in 2025 might seem very impressive, you have to put that in context that that's spanning a career of 15 years or so. The second caveat is to talk a little bit about my situation and what helped me get to where I am today. I use the word privilege in that I see the privilege that I had is what helped me get through the starting years of being a game designer. And I think these are the toughest years if you want to be a professional game designer. These are the years where you're not a full-time game designer, you're doing it as a side hobby because it's not earning enough money to support you. And these are the hardest years professionally. You don't know so many people in the industry, you haven't pitched to publishers, you have to learn a lot of different skills. Usually there are some significant costs in terms of the ratio of what you have to spend to what you're earning in order to further your career in terms of going to conventions or other events. And all these things add up to a whole bunch of time that is effectively unpaid. And you need to spend that time getting better at your craft and doing all the things you need to do to be a professional game designer, communicating with publishers, pitching to them, making prototypes, sending them off, playtesting. You need to be able to do all these things to be able to become a better game designer and be a professional game designer in terms of getting games published and following up with different projects. And really the way I see it is privilege is being able to spend all that time honing your skills, improving your craft while earning no money and being in a situation to do so. Not everyone has the privilege of that kind of situation. And especially when I started out in game design way back in 2010 and for the next 5 to 10 years, I did have the privilege of being able to spend a lot of time learning the craft of game design and the profession. For quite a bit of that time, I was a PhD student, and then I moved on to a job within the University of Cambridge, both of which offered me a lot of flexibility in how many hours I needed to work, and give me the flexibility to take time off and go to various events that I needed to improve my game design career. I was living in a city in Cambridge that was particularly vibrant for game design. There were a lot of people moving to the area. That meant we had a really vibrant playtesting group, and that was hugely beneficial. And I didn't have a lot of other responsibilities in life. I didn't have other people that were relying on me to earn money in order to support them. I didn't have any other time-intensive responsibilities, such as looking after children or pets. All these things add together to give me that privilege of a lot of time that I could spend on game design. And I put this at the front just to really underline the fact that while the number of what I've earned from game design is important, and it reveals a lot about how I work and how I've gone in the industry, there's a whole bunch of context that's attached to that number. And that's what I hope you can keep in mind, as well as thinking about just the financial part of this video. So let's dive in and take a look at what I've earned from game design year by year. All the numbers in this video are in euros, so feel free to convert that to whatever monetary equivalent you have in your own country. Euros at the moment are about the same as US dollars, for instance. And we're going to start in 2020, which was the first year where I really started tracking my numbers a little bit more properly. So in 2020, I earned 76,625 euros from game design. In 2021, that dipped slightly to around 54,000 euros. And in 2022, I had a huge jump, effectively doubling my income up to around 114,000 euros in that year. In 2023, I earned 175,000 euros. In 2024, it was steady, still at about 158,000 euros. And in 2025, I earned 207,102 euros from game design and associated income streams. Editor Matthew here. Just to note that these figures are gross income. It doesn't include any of my costs, such as costs going to conventions or materials for prototype, and it also doesn't include my tax, for instance. I mean, what can I say? I'm really happy with how things are going. It's been quite a rise over the last 5 or 6 years. My income has almost tripled in the last 5 years. And I wouldn't say this because I've become so much of a better game designer in the last 5 years, but as I talk about the lag in how finances work in game design, you tend to make more money as you go on because a lot of the older projects might still be making money. You have more new projects which will add to the money you're making, and it kind of builds and builds on itself. And there is sort of one other main reason why my income has gone up so much this year compared to the last, up by about 50,000 euros, which I'll get to a little bit later. And while this graph looks really impressive, and I am really proud of how things are going, I think I have to show a different graph, which is the really important context to take from this. And this is the graph that shows all my income by year from the very start of when I started game design. And it goes all the way back to 2012 when I received my first advance payment for Relic Runners from Days of Wonder, which would go on to be published in 2013. I haven't tracked all my numbers in between. I wasn't very good at keeping on top of those kind of things. I wish I had. It would be much easier now. So there's a huge gap from 2014 to 2019 where I haven't actually got the numbers, but I have put the numbers on this graph for 2012 and 2013, which, as I said, were only for Relic Runners. The advance of the game in 2012, which was about 3,000 euros, and the first royalty payment that I got for the game in 2013, which was a little bit more than 6,000 euros. As you can see, these later numbers, earning over 200,000 euros this year, it's very impressive, but it's taken me a long time to get to that. It's taken me 13 years to get to that point. One thing I'd love to see in the industry is to improve the rate that designers can start making decent money from their game designs, that they don't need a whole decade plus of time to get to the point of making enough money to live on as a game designer. And this next chart breaks down my income by source, essentially looking at the different royalties I've earned from the different games this year. And up top, you can see really one of the main changes from 2024 to 2025 was the release in 2024 of Minecraft Explorers. I made a video about the design of that game. You can check that out. But 2025 was the first year where I earned royalties from the game. The game started going on sale in 2024, but I only actually received the money in 2025. And that shot up within 1 year to be the biggest contributor to my income from game design, at just over 20% of the 200,000 euros that I earned. I don't think I've ever really been involved in a project quite like this that's attached to such a popular IP, and realizing just how much that can drive a huge amount of sales. The game's quite small and relatively cheap to buy. It's about 9 euros, I think, in Germany. So I suspect that it's a great present for a lot of people. There are a lot of sales around Christmas. And that's all contributed to a huge jump in my royalties, because that's effectively a whole new source of income that I got just in 2025. And then going down the list a little bit, I've got the Echoes series, which has been going now for about 5 years. And I think we're up to the 12th release in the Echoes series now, also with Ravensburger, so that's about 16% of my income. Pray Another Day, I think, is for me a real surprise. That game now is 2 years old at this point. It was released in 2023 from Edition Spielwiese. And even 2 years after it's released, it's still 10% of my income. And for a small card game that, again, doesn't sell for a lot of money, again, I think it's about 9 or 10 euros, to be earning still this amount of money 2 years after it's released is a really nice surprise. Very often games get released and you make a little bit of money when they are initially released, but that might be the entirety of all the money you ever see from the game, and the sales drop off exponentially often. So the main way that you need to survive as a game designer is actually to have some games that continue to sell past that initial release. And that is borne out in these numbers. You can see these 3 games: Echoes, which is from 2021, Pray Another Day 2023, Next Station London, I think, is from 2022. These are the games that have managed to keep selling year after year, and they've contributed a really large amount to my income. So not only has that helped me earn more money, but it's helped me earn more money for more years, which means I can have a stable income as a game designer year on year. And now I've been able to do this for the 4th year running as a full-time game designer. Speaking of Next Station London, I've broken it into Next Station London and Next Station Paris here. And you can see a little bit in the smaller section of the graph, there's also Next Station Tokyo. But altogether, it's about 19%, so it's about the same as something like Echoes. I really should have probably put them together. In 2024, I saw a really nice bump in the sales of Next Station London that was I think, a direct cause of it being nominated for the Spiel des Jahres in that year. And while the sales have dropped back a little bit in 2025, they've still remained pretty strong. And again, this is for a game that is at this point 3 or 4 years old. Going down a little bit, then some other significant sources of income are some income that I've derived taking money out of Postmark Games, which is the print and play company that I run with Rory Muldoon. I hope that at some point Rory and I will make a video about Postmark's finances specifically, and the money that I take out of Postmark's not directly tied to the amount of sales we've made in a particular year, so I wouldn't read into this number as being correlated with how well Postmark's doing. It's just that at different points, we take out money for various reasons, and I took out a certain amount of money in 2025. And then you've got a couple of other significant things around the 5% range. You've got the Guild of Merchant Explorers, which did see a little bit of a bump of being nominated for the Kenner Spiel des Jahres in 2024. I made a mistake, it was 2023 for Next Station London being nominated. And so that's still doing quite well, especially in Germany. You've got the Adventure Games, which is a series of narrative games that are now up to their 10th release, published by Cosmos in Germany. And you've got Perspective, which is another narrative style game from Space Cowboys. And all up, I had 31 different sources of income in 2025. And that ranged all the way down to The Gardens, which is a game published by Grail Games. Back in 2022, that earned me about €6, all the way up to Minecraft, which earned me a bit over 40,000 euros in 2025. So you can see there's a massive disparity in terms of what you earn from different games. And for me, one of the main strategies to becoming a full-time game designer has been making a lot of games. I've had over 60 games published. And it's not that all of those games need to do well, or in fact will do well. Every time you release a game, it's another shot at hopefully having something be successful. But if I release so many games, then I up my chances that at least a few of them will do well enough to make a lot of money and keep selling year after year. And that's how it's borne out. So I've got these pie graphs for each of the years from 2020 through to 2025. And I'll go through them step by step. And I wouldn't worry too much about the details, but there is a nice trend that is happening in my career, which gives me a little bit of confidence. Hopefully I'll be able to keep being a full-time game designer for a few more years yet. If we go back to 2020, you can see, without even looking at which games made income, you can see that my total income is dominated from one or two sources. And in fact, one of the games, Monumental, made half the money I made in that year. Moving on to 2021, same story. I made over 60% of my income in 2021 from the adventure games. Move on to 2022, and still the adventure games are basically half of all my income. And as we get into 2023, you can see that this is starting to break up a little bit. I'm starting to get more games contributing significant amounts of money to my overall income. In this case, between Postmark, the adventure games, and the Echoes game series, they're all starting to make significant contributions to the overall pie. And then in 2024, you can start seeing that even the best games are only contributing 20% or so to my overall income. And then you land back at 2025, and you can see that the highest piece of the pie is about 20%. And what that tells me is that I've got kind of a more and more diversified portfolio of games that are earning me income. The nice thing about this is that I'm less and less dependent on any one game to support myself as a full-time game designer. Looking back in 2021, which was when I made the decision to be a full-time game designer, all my eggs were basically in one basket, which were the adventure games. When I made that decision, we'd had 3 releases for the adventure games, and I knew we would keep releasing new boxes for that series. So I had some certainty that hopefully those royalties would continue for at least a couple of years. But as you can see, what started with a really large chunk of income, now the adventure games are down to about 5% of my overall income. And while my income overall has increased, so that percentage drops just as a basis of the overall amount of royalties increasing, the actual royalties that I'm earning from the adventure games have decreased year on year. As the game gets older and fewer people are buying it, that's just the nature of how these things work. But I'm no longer dependent on it like I was back in 2021 or 2022. Because in this industry, you never really know how a game will keep selling. It might have done really well in one year, but that's no guarantee that it will continue selling well in the next year. And even more so for these games which are series, where you keep releasing new boxes in the series to help keep them alive, there's no certainty that the publisher will keep supporting them. At some point, they're going to make the decision to end the line and not release any more boxes for that series. That's happened for a few games like Bubble Stories, where I had 3 boxes released for Bubble Stories over the years, and now they're not doing any more of that, and you can see the royalties from that series are dropping to almost nothing. I also want to touch on digital royalties, as they grow in importance in how they can contribute to your overall income. The big chunk of digital royalties that I earned in 2025 were from Board Game Arena. Games that are premium on Board Game Arena, i.e. you need to have a paid membership in order to play them. they generate income for the publisher that's put them on that platform. And that income is based off a percentage of the time spent playing that game compared against the overall income that BGA generates from users using the site over all the games. So basically, the more time people spend playing your game, the more money you make. The biggest chunk I get from Board Game Arena is from the Next Station series, lumped together London, Tokyo, and Paris all together here, and I earn about €5,500 from that. That's down slightly from 2024, where I earned about €6,000, but I'd say that's relatively stable year on year, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes as you go into a new year. They've just announced that there's going to be a new release for Next Station Berlin, so it'll be interesting to see how that affects these numbers. Also new to Board Game Arena in 2025 was the Guild of Merchant Explorers, which earned a little less than €1,000 that year. And I'm really hoping that that might reinvigorate the game. I think it's a really fantastic game for digital play, and the BGA implementation is really great. So again, it'll be interesting to see how this goes year on year. And My Shelfie also earns about €100, which is pretty good considering it's a game that was from 2022, and I think it went on to Board Game Arena either late 2022 or early 2023. So to still be making some money from plays 3 years later is pretty great, because there's not really any promotion of the game from the publisher anymore, it just exists in the library on BGA. The really great thing about digital royalties is that they don't rely on the publisher having to keep making and selling games. They just exist on the platform. Players can play them at any point into the future as they want. So you have the chance to kind of increase the amount of time that you might earn money from your designs. So it's a really important thing to be thinking about as a game designer, and to make sure that you're covering in your contracts when you're negotiating them with a publisher. So when you've gotten an offer for publication from a publisher, make sure you include a clause in that contract about digital royalties, and specifically BGA royalties if they're open to that. The number I always like to start at is that you receive 50% of the royalties that the publisher receives from BGA. So the publisher gets 50% and you get 50%. That's where I like to start the negotiations from, and of course sometimes that number goes up or down depending on how those negotiations go. But as a guide, I would try and get 50% if possible. And sometimes part of the negotiation is that I offer that I get 50% of the royalties, but only after the initial development costs that the publisher had to pay to get it onto BGA are recouped. Also in 2025, there was a standalone app for Next Station launched, which earned about €1,200. And I have one digital game that was made with Arnold Rouse of Tiny Touch Tales called Card Crawl Adventure. That was released in 2024, I believe. And actually it's still earning reasonable amount of money. It made about €2,800 in 2025. And that's been pretty consistent month on month. And the last number that I've included in digital royalties is the money I've earned from YouTube. Just in case anyone was interested. I've been doing YouTube more seriously for about a year now. I've released something like 45 videos in the last year. I was monetized in July of 2025, and so far I've made enough money from AdSense for one payout, which was $100 or about €70. So if you're thinking I'm getting rich from YouTube, I can assure you I'm certainly not, but it's nice to get something, I suppose. So that was an overview of what I earned from game design in 2025 as a full-time game designer in the industry. If you're a game designer yourself and you'd be comfortable sharing what you've earned from game design in 2025, I'd love you to share that in comments below. Really, the main reason I do this is to increase transparency in the industry, to help other designers get a feeling of what you can earn in the industry as a designer and what to expect. And the more people that share their own numbers, the better snapshot that we all get of how the industry is going and what you can earn as a game designer. If you have any questions about what I've earned from game design or these particular numbers, please also leave them down in the comments and I'll do my best to answer. And if you are particularly interested in this kind of thing, do let me know, because I'd be happy to do some follow-up videos, maybe looking at how specific games have performed over the years and what I've earned from specific titles. So if you're interested in that, do let me know, and that'll encourage me to make those kind of videos. I'll also leave a link to my previous blog posts where I summarize my finances in 2024 and 2023 down below, where I went over those numbers in more detail, and you can compare those years to this year if you want. But as always, thanks very much for watching, and all the best with your game designing. Bye.